Hello, my name is Mark Vandenbosh. I'd like to start out by acknowledging that I'm honored to be speaking to you today from the City of London, Ontario. It is the traditional territories of the Chippewa of the Thames, the Oneida of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. As we forge forward and continue working with Indigenous nations, I want to acknowledge and recognize the deep connection and historical relationship between Indigenous peoples and the land. I'm here today to talk to you about the ag tech landscape. Now, it may seem odd that a university professor would be doing this, so let me give you a bit of context. I'm a business professor, or a professor emeritus, who grew up on a farm and really was always undecided between whether or not I'd be working on a farm or working somewhere else. And as I went to school and started teaching at the business school here at the Ivey Business School, I started spending a lot more time with farmers and with agricultural businesses, so that over the years, I've taught several hundred of the largest farmers in Canada, as well as many companies in the food processing space, as well as the distribution of agricultural supplies and inputs. And I want to just sort of spend some time talking about the ag tech landscape, because ag tech is something that has come up recently and is actually going to have a profound effect on how agriculture operates in the future. But there still are some questions as to how effective or necessary it is in many cases. So I'm just going to give you a background and talk a little bit about how you might be able to access it. There we go. Let me give you an agenda for today. First, I want to talk a little bit about the changing demands on agriculture. And then I'll talk a little bit about the case for high-tech agriculture industry, as well as classifying what ag tech might be. And then follow that by Canada behind other countries, and finish it up by showing how you can participate in the ag tech revolution. Next slide. Agriculture has changed. If you look at the historical situation where you produced what you could on the land and you sold it as close to where you grew it as possible, or you used it yourself, it's very different today, where you have, all of these situations where vertical farms in cities are bringing the growing process very close to the users. You see drone technology scanning fields, both from a delivery of inputs, but also a scanning and imaging of what's going on. And now you have livestock being monitored by the individual unit rather than by a herd or anything like that. Now, this has led to dramatic increased productivity. And we see that across crops, we see that in dairy, we see that in yields per acre, and a whole bunch of areas. But at the same time, operating costs and capital costs have gone up perhaps as much or more. Land prices, have gone up maybe sixfold in 20, 30 years. You've got equipment costs. You've got all of these things going into making that productivity that you talked about. But probably the biggest changes that are taking place right now are the demands that farmers have. First of all, there's more stringent food safety and traceability requirements that we need to know, and probably a good thing, we need to know exactly where our food comes from and how it reached the table from where we are. Secondly, there's a drive for sustainable farming practices. Historically, we thought that, let's put on as much input as we can to get better output, without recognizing that the land itself is very different from acre to acre and even within that time period. So right now, we're starting to look at how do we make sure that we preserve the land, that we have sustainable crops for the future. And it really talks about the 4 R's of sort of providing inputs. What's the right source? What's the right rate that I should apply it? What's the right time that I should apply it? And what's the right place? So that we're not putting inputs all over the field, but only where it's necessary and where it will make the most difference. The sustainability drive has not just been on the farm, though. I mean, it's really the push all the way from the farm to the fork, where food processing, consumption, as well as waste, which is one of the biggest areas problems we have, is eliminated or reduced to a dramatic degree. The third area, also not surprising, is the move to a low-carbon future. Climate change is real. We do have some very significant challenges facing agriculture. In Canada, the big three greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane from livestock, and nitrous oxide from manure management and fertilizer uses as well. All three of these have a significant impact on greenhouse gases that agriculture produces, and all three need to be reduced and managed into the future. Next slide. Really what this has done is move to these challenges of food traceability, sustainable farming practices, and a low-carbon future have really contributed to an explosion of ag tech innovation. And it really has come to the forefront in the last few years, where we think about taking all the technology and ideas that we have that we might have applied to other industries, and how do we bring them to bear on agriculture to sort of really reach those three goals. Next slide. KPMG has really put together a number of different reports on this. One of the ones that I found was Growing Canada, How Agribusiness is Evolving, and they put out a case for transforming agriculture into a high-tech industry. Now, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but it really is a lot of the pressure that's pushing, the industry towards being much more high-tech in the future than it was in the past. The first one is growing population. By 2050, the world's population is expected to reach about 10 billion, and it increases our need for food while the amount of available farmland remains about the same if we think about pan-globally. At the same time, as more and more people move into higher income brackets, and this would be mostly in the developing world, their demand for protein is going up dramatically. And so not only do they ask for more food because we're getting more people, but the types of food and the protein richness of that food is going up as well. And so that has a higher demand on some of the sustainability and carbon goals that we have in the future. The second one is urbanization. More than 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas, and they rely on the farming industry to provide for them. Now, this could be that maybe we should start growing food closer to where the people are, which is what's led to the whole vertical farming revolution, where you have towers, greenhouses, and the like, providing certain crops very close to urban locations. That reduces the footprint by which the transportation costs go up, as well as you can really control the environment and reduce the pesticide usage. There are societal changes, and I talked about this earlier. There's a demand for research-intensive foods, such as animal-based products, and that continues to increase as people increase their incomes. Climate change. We see changing weather conditions everywhere around the globe. This affects our soil, the quality of our crops, our yields, you name it. And can we bring technology to bear to sort of help us either forecast or determine how best to sort of use our resources effectively? Labor shortages is another huge problem. I know somewhere in this conference you're talking with the Royal Bank about the Farmer 4.0. And really one of the issues you have is that labor is not in supply, especially in Canadian agriculture. Temporary foreign workers help in some regard. COVID has restricted that in some sense, but there's not enough labor for the type of farming production that is coming off Canadian farms right now. And this challenge is only going to multiply in the future. And then there's things that are happening more globally. Trade, international trade agreements, and the fungibility of food is quite impressive. If you take something as simple as a cereal bar, let's say from Kellogg's, the products in that cereal bar may come from more than 10 or 12 different countries. And they're shipped through commodities around the world and end up in food processing facilities everywhere. This really pushes the need for traceability, but it also sort of makes us really want to think about, is this the right way in which we should be farming in the future? Regulations on food safety are going to go up, and integrated supply chains really mean that we need to understand everything that takes place from when we pick up a farm implement to when we put it on someone's table. And all of that traceability is going to be much more in the future. So how do we do this? It really says that we need to bring as much technology as we can to sort of address some of these needs. Now, this is what the industry is saying. And there is others that would look at this and say, well, it's moving away from what being close to the land really means. But there is this trade-off, and I think that that's going to be something that we're going to be pushed for in the future. Ag tech is seen as the panacea to solve some of these things. Applying data to agriculture, for example, and increasing the monitoring capability, adding automation, and creation of functional foods are all things that Silicon Valley and, let's say, the food companies have really been able to do in other industries. So farmers have been relying on looking outside and seeing what the weather is, or determining when they plant based on some almanac. But can we really add data to that? Can we really monitor what's going on so that we can apply that right amount of input at the right time in the right location? Can we automate some of these activities to actually reduce the pesticide usage, for example? And all of these types of activities should be able to make us meet those goals of that we're going to need within agriculture. Now, if we go to the next slide, there's a long way from idea to adoption. It's great, and all of these companies have wonderful stories on how they're going to make the world a better place. But the reality is there's a long way from an idea to an adoption. One of the statements I always like to make is that Emerson made up with a quote that says, "Build a better mousetrap and people will beat a path to your door." In reality, there's probably not a bigger lie to be told. It really is the road to bankruptcy is paved with innovation. And it's because it's one thing to have an idea, but how practical is the implementation of that idea? Can you take something that you design in a computer lab and then sort of apply it on a broad scale? Will older farmers change fast enough? Because we know that the average age of a farmer in Canada and in the United States is rapidly aging. Are they willing to adopt something new or change? And at the same time, younger farmers, their biggest concern is debt and the cost of everything. Will they be able to afford the technology that's coming down this way? Another aspect is that it's very difficult to assess the value of innovations without a full understanding of the specific farm. Every farm is different. The needs of every farm is different, and the way in which I'm going to bring in labor and create value from what these innovations might bring is going to be different. Many technologies require widespread adoption to be effective. We might have a great situation to reduce food waste if there was a direct connection between the farmer and the grocery store, because then we know exactly when food is demanded. Well, the reality is you're not going to create any sort of link between all the food outlets and all the producers of food. So if that's a great technology, it's not really going to be implemented that well. Changing farming practices is also very risky. And a lot of times someone will say, geez, if that's high risk, I'll just wait. And that slows the adoption to a rate that others, you might run out of money before these adoptions really pay off. And one of the other problems that ag tech has that it's trying to address is that these innovators don't often speak farm. Now, it seems like a different type of language, but there is a different language when speaking with people in the agriculture industry than there would be, let's say, in the computer industry. And though we might be able to see that monitoring or imagery might really lead to some improvements in productivity or decision making, unless you can put it in the terms of the person that's receiving that information, they're just going to reject it. So even though ag tech has a lot of these potentials to do the major big three, which is increase food traceability, build more sustainable agriculture, and reduce the carbon footprint, there's going to be a lot of bumpiness along the way in which we can see this happening. Um, Next slide. If you think about innovators, though, or investors are betting in ag tech. The ag tech market is expected to be over $725 billion by 2025. And that is sales to end user farmers. Growth in ag tech investment is phenomenal because these investors believe in the potential that's out there. Global investment in ag tech companies in 2020 reached over $22 billion. And Canadian investment, though much more modest, was between 80 million and 190 million per year for the last few years. And all of this money is being put in there because they believe that the output or the potential to improve profitability through productivity, traceability, sustainability, all of these types of activities or all these types of goals are really within our reach because of this technology. And the scale of what's out there is truly fascinating. Next slide. I think it's important to sort of try and describe what is ag tech. And ag tech is any technology or application that ensures agricultural practices are more efficient, productive, and or safe. And so when you think about things like production of higher yields using fewer resources, or reducing waste or pesticide use, or improving food safety and animal health and welfare, all of these things might be positive goals that might come out of an investment in ag tech. And you can see how a farmer would want to invest in something that says, look, I want to reduce even if I keep the same productivity, if I use far fewer resources, I might be willing to pay for some of these technologies. And if I make better decisions or more timely decisions, I might get higher production using the same inputs. So all of those things are possible. Now, next slide. If you think about how to classify ag tech, it's a very broad field, and I've got three types of tech listed on this slide. I've got ag tech, I've got food supply chain tech, and I've got food tech. But there's many other types of things that I can talk about. So let me try and lay this out a little bit. Ag tech encompasses the whole of the food production up to the farm gate. So from I think I might want to get into growing something up until the product leaves the farm gate. And this involves what's generally seen as ag tech, but it also includes indoor ag tech. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but all of the growth in sort of doing things indoor that was typically done outdoor. And the third one would be all of management of livestock, could be livestock tech. What I haven't included here, although I'll talk a bit about later, is that there's a whole bunch of crop tech. How do I make better crops? Most of the ag tech discussions that we're going to have in these three areas are really about how do we bring more data or better environments to the growing practice, rather than how do we bring better crops. And whether or not better, that's viewed in the eye of the beholder, but perhaps more natural, perhaps more self-resistant, all of those types of things. After the product leaves the farm gate, there is food supply chain check, because now one of the things I want to minimize, if I have these goals of sustainable farming and I want a low carbon future, and traceability, I really have to worry about logistics and processing from the farm gate to the retail store or the food service outlet. And if you think about the distance food travels, how it's broken up into ingredients, how it's combined into food processing, all of that thing requires a lot of technology. And there's a whole group of things in that happens. And then there is really the food tech part, and that is from the retail location or food service outlet out towards the table of the consumer. And that would include sales, marketing, preparation, consumption, nutritional health, and so on. So when we talk about ag tech, we really are talking about up to the end of the farm gate. And so that's really where I'm going to focus most of the rest of this talk. Now, if you look at the next slide here, I've got a picture of the ag tech landscape 2019. Well, I pulled this straight from a website called betterfoodventures.com. And what Better Food Ventures does is it really tries to classify all the different companies that are involved in the ag tech landscape. And I'll show you a couple more of these later, and really sort of lay out what industries they're in, what they're trying to solve, and how they're really trying to make a business for themselves. And they, as you can see, it clearly doesn't cover all the companies that are out there, but it does cover some of the major ones. And you can see that there's a whole raft of different types of things that companies are trying to build technologies for. And as I said earlier, in this particular situation, most of it has to do with data. How do I bring better data, more timely data to the farmer who has to make decisions? And if you look at the top left-hand or the left-hand side, it's really in-field sensors and systems, what's happening in the field, all the way out to the right, which really looks at post-harvest monitoring and efficiency. And then the bottom has these value chain enablers. And I'll talk about sort of each group individually, and then I'll give you some examples. If you think about in-field sensors and systems, it's really around how do I get information that I really need about what's going on the farm. It could be weather information, it could be soil information, it could be nutrient information, it could be how well what's the pesticide load on what's going on to that marketplace or that farm, how much water is there. All of those types of things are what's happening in the field. Then there is, as you move towards the right, there's a whole bunch of areas where there's software that helps me manage how to make decisions on the farm. So I might get all this sensing information that would be from a weather station or rainfall or soil analysis. And then I have to sort of decide what decisions do I need to make in terms of what's going on my farm. Do I add a fertilizer? Do I add a pesticide? Do I harvest at this time? Do I harvest at that time? What do I do? And these farm management systems really spend some time taking that data and then sort of somehow integrating it into what's really happening on my farm by acre, by field, by location, and so on. But there's other aspects to farm management as well, and that is how do I buy inputs? How do I sell outputs? All of these things around what's going on at different parts of the the value chain. So, for example, if I want to sell my crops, how do I do that? How do I make sure that I'm getting the right value for what I'm doing? How do I buy equipment? How do I get labor, and so on? Other areas, as you move more to the right, are to do with automation, because there's a lot of technology that's out there on how do I have automated tools in the field. For example, do I have an automated seeder? Do I have an automated weed picker? Do I have an automated harvester? All of this automation helps me save on labor and maybe improves the quality of the harvest that I have as well. And then there's a lot on the right, more on compliance and selling. How do I ensure that what I am making is of the right quality? How do I know that I can actually, test what it is that I have that will be of good value to my customers? How do I know how much yield I'm going to get? How do I sell these products? All of these companies are in different areas of that. On the bottom, it really has to do with value chain enablers, which for the most part has to do with traceability. Traceability is going to come right down to, I had a picture of an apple with a barcode on it. It's almost going to come down to the piece of fruit. It's clearly already at the animal, all the way through the process, so that anyone knows exactly what has taken place on that particular farm with this particular output. Now, there's lots of companies on here, and it's hard to make sense, but there's a whole wide range of different examples. So if I look at the next page, I've got a couple of examples of sort of the more basic level to start with. One is a company called Farmers Business Network. A pretty large organization that really tries to be a platform where a whole bunch of information is shared not only amongst farmers, but it really becomes a marketplace. And if you think about what's the cause of, or what's the requirement for this, you can take the analogy of you can't see the forest for the trees. So if I'm a farmer and I might be in a rural Saskatchewan somewhere, I might know what's happening, locally in some of the areas, but I don't know what the best practices are, in another wheat growing region or barley growing region or canola growing region. I may not know how much they're paying for crop inputs. I may not know how much they're paying for, farm implements, farm machinery. I may not know how much they're paying for labor. All of these kinds of things I don't know because I'm working on my farm and I only have my own farm to worry about. Even when you think about farming practices, should I add more fertilizer or take some away? Well, I don't know the output of that, but somebody somewhere probably has had that experience. And so what the Farm Business Network does is try to pool all the experiences of thousands of farmers so that they can actually get more accurate understanding of what would happen if I did this on my farm because someone else has tried it before, or what are the prices that are paid by others on different inputs. And so it gives farmers more confidence in making the decision. So it's really a marketplace or a platform where farmers can actually anonymously share their data, and then the aggregation of that data actually gives value to the farmer themselves. On the right-hand side, I've got Farmers Edge here, which is really about precision agriculture. I picked Farmers Edge because it is a Canadian company that has grown quite large as well. And their purpose is really to, what I see this as sort of, when you envision ag tech, this is kind of what you think about. It's really taking the farm and digitizing the farm and then using that information to guide what's going on. I find weather, I look at soil, I put sensors and things on my machinery so that it knows when to apply the inputs. It knows what the harvest is from every square inch of the property that I have because it's all connected to GPS. Here's a little on the next slide as a video about Farmers Edge. And it might take a couple minutes to watch, but it gives you a background, a little bit of propaganda, but it gives you a background of all the things that can happen through that product.
Farmers are stewards of the land. They're feeling the effects of climate change and are at the forefront of reversing it. Today's farmers grow more with less, and new technology makes it possible. It's called smart farming.
Farmers make more than 50 critical decisions each season. One wrong decision affects the next, and then it's a domino effect that impacts not only their bottom line, but the entire food supply chain. That's where Farmers Edge comes in, with the most robust real-time data sets in agriculture. We digitize the entire farm with connected field sensors, layer geospatial analysis, use cutting-edge soil sampling techniques, and process all that field-centric data in a carbon-neutral environment. All data is integrated in one platform, Farm Command, to support every decision on that farm.
We apply artificial intelligence, big data analytics, and agronomic expertise to generate granular level insights right down to the acre. This helps farmers grow the highest quality low carbon grain. And the best part, it's all automated and seamlessly integrated. It's the utmost accuracy and precision that makes it so powerful.
Each farm we work with is unique. We assess their current management practices and then choose the right carbon strategy for their operation. We help manage greenhouse gases in two ways. The first is to help farmers capture more carbon in the soil through regenerative land management practices like direct seeding. The second is to combine our robust data sets with a 4Rs approach to optimize how the crop is fertilized. This reduces nutrient losses and lowers nitrous oxide emissions.
Everything is monitored in real time throughout the growing season to provide an accurate field-level sustainability score. These are verified environmental digital assets that can be traced back to the actual acre it's been generated from. Our technology helps farmers produce more food with less time and effort while drastically lowering the operation's carbon footprint, proving that sustainability, productivity, and profitability come together.
It's a win-win situation. Farmers become more profitable through cutting costs, improving efficiency, increasing yield, and generating high-quality carbon offsets. Companies committed to reducing their environmental footprint now have access to the greenest carbon offsets out there. Food companies can source high-quality, low-carbon grain, and our communities have access to cleaner water, fresher air, and a secure and safe food supply. Carbon reduction is just really a great story from every angle. Farmers are part of the climate change solution.
So as you can see, Farmer's Edge really takes a look at trying to have all of these data sources to help the farmer have a precision agricultural framework. And this allows them to reduce inputs, reduce their carbon footprint, and really try and optimize the sustainability of their operation. Another kind of company that would be in here is robotics. So here's another company that started out as a Canadian company, was bought out by Raven Industries, but Dot Technologies is really an automated vehicle system. And essentially, one of the biggest challenges that farmers have, especially large-scale farmers, is that the optimal time to plant crops is very, very narrow. And if I'm not out there at the right time, I'm not going to be able to get the crop in, and my yield goes down tremendously, and everything follows from that. So what this allows you to do is say, hey, I can plant my crop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this machinery will be able to sort of plant every crop, every inch of or every acre of my land, right down to the tolerances of a very high specific GPS system. What DOT has done, starting with a planter, but then moving on to a whole framework, is that, well, if I can't just do planting, I can also do spraying, I can do other types of activities that allow everything to be automated. And these machines are working right now, allowing people to sort of do this automation. Now, there's automation in a whole bunch of different fields as well: strawberry picking, tobacco picking, you name it, whatever crop you have, there's more automation that's trying to go out there and solve this problem. Because not only does automation make things more precise, an automated planter is better than a manual planter, but it also really allows you to extend the day and reduce or extend the labor usage that you have. It also has some interesting possibilities in the future when you think about robotic technologies. And one of the real opportunities is moving towards full organics, and moving towards full organics through automation. One of the problems you have in a lot of crops is that weeds grow and outcompete the crop. So how do I get rid of weeds? Traditionally, what they would do is they would either cultivate between rows to sort of knock down the weeds, or they would spray some sort of chemical, which is also not what customers want and maybe not great for the land either. But they have already developed robotic weed pickers that basically use cameras to determine what's the plant and what's the weed, and it will take the weed out. And these, again, are in operation in test and small-scale operations. And by doing that, it allows organics to take place on a much, much larger scale if this technology gets approved. Next slide. But then there's a whole bunch of different kinds of ag tech applications. This is a company called Tillable. It's not a very big company, but it really says, how do I manage my farmland more effectively? I might want to rent land. I might want to try and get value by renting my land. I might want to sell my land. I might want to buy more. what's all the data that's out there? And they look at every parcel that's available, and they really try and assess the value of each parcel and allow you to sort of manage your asset in a very much a digital way by having much better data than you would by saying, geez, what did the neighbor's farm sell for? Or how much are they getting in rent? You really look more at a broader scale. Another kind of solution is a company called Predicas is one of the companies that's looking at this. And this is more on a global scale, in a sense that you can think about a lot of industries that are really determined on climate. So if the weather changes, and you hear this a lot as crops are becoming closer to harvest, how big is the corn or wheat harvest going to be this year? Because that's going to affect how much demand an export nation or an import nation will be able to need and an export nation will be able to provide, or a company may need to sort of determine. And so what this company does is it looks at weather patterns across a broad sector so that they can actually predict what's the harvest of any particular crop on any particular day for any particular weather event. And that allows you to insure against this type of activity, or at least understand better what your future costs might be. And then as the last example, here's a company called HarvestMark that is really putting in an end-to-end food ID system so that if I go to the store, as the person on the right is, and I look at a particular product, I can determine what field and what day and under what conditions this particular product was harvested. And it requires the farmers to make sure that the data is available as it flows through the supply chain, that the retailer can actually put this on the shelf. And that really is something that both from a sustainability perspective, but also as we start tracking carbon and food safety initiatives are all going to be very much important. So these are just examples of some companies that are doing things at various stages. And as you can see in these examples, what they're trying to do is add data and understand how that data can improve the farm business or improve the whole system. Now, in all of these cases, there is an underlying belief that there is value to be added. We talked about that, adoption situation. It's unclear. In some cases, this is very valuable. And for my farm and my situation, because I'm dealing with this kind of customer, it absolutely makes sense. But if you think of the multitude of technologies that are going here, not all technologies are going to make sense. And it makes navigating that landscape by the buyers of this technology very difficult. Even a system like this really is going to be pushed by a retailer who says, I want ID all the way back to the farm, and that will kind of determine that all of this takes place. It's unlikely that the farmer is going to pick an ID system and say, oh, I think I'm going to ID my products this way, without knowing what customers are going to want down the road. And so all of this integration is something that is not yet there, but something that we're moving towards. Now, I talked a little bit about ag tech, but you could also do the same thing about livestock, because there's tons of technology in livestock. And this is really a similar type landscape from mixingbowlhub.com that looks at, in the very much same way, what is the companies that are trying to improve livestock management. And if you think about what they're trying to do, on the one hand, track livestock health. On the other hand, at the right-hand side, how do we manage operations so that we can actually, go through the operations better? Long ago, we've already long past the day. We are still in, determining whether we should have a Fitbit. But Fitbit for animals has been around for a long time. Cows really are managed to the individual animal, and they're tracked from a health, from a productivity, from a feed system in many, many situations. They do this to try and detect and prevent disease so that they really don't have to sort of add more antibiotics and the like. They try to do it from improving productivity through happier animals, happier health. And as you move more towards the right of this slide, you can see that operations management and how do I run my farm based on all of these technologies that are out there. My herd needs to be managed. I need to sell them at the right time. I need to sort of determine whether or not I'm getting the productivity across the herd. I need to know whether or not I need to do some breeding management and the like. And at the same time, like we saw in farm tech, automation is becoming a pretty big activity. And again, it's the dearth of labor to manage the productivity is really one of the reasons why that's happening. Another reason probably has to do with that, farm outputs are primarily commodities, and the price you get for your commodity is limited by supply demand, and that might require some sort of scale economies before any of these farms make sense. Just to give a couple of examples of things like here, and they're very wide ranging. For example, here's a company called Sell My Livestock. How do I sell my livestock? And basically, it's Kijiji for livestock. Because those types of things were not available broad scale online. I took my livestock to the local yard and they sold it. Well, now I can do that, and I can sell to any breeder, any farmer, anywhere, because the internet allows that to happen. I can manage my herd from my smartphone, so I may not even need to be around, and I can sort of determine all the aspects of what's going on in terms of how their health is progressing, how they're growing compared to last year, how my breeding program is working, and all of that can be documented automatically so that when I need to provide my traceability information to the next player along the chain, I already have this. And the far right one is actually quite an interesting one. It is livestock in a sense, and it really is a company called Insect, which really is in the business of growing mealworms for both fertilizer and food. And so they have a vertical farm where they grow mealworms and they produce them. The excrement from the mealworms as they grow turns into direct fertilizer that they put on fields. But the mealworms themselves are used as livestock feed. All but 95% are, and the other 5% are used as breeding stock for the next generation. And they have this continuous cycle whereby they're creating a very high quality protein out of insects, where before that would have been a very difficult aspect to do. And for animals like fish, insects make up a huge portion of the diet already in the wild, and so this is sort of a replacement view of it. Just a breadth of what's going on. Next slide really talks about where the investors are going, because the investors here are deciding with their money as to which of these companies they look at. And if you look at this screen, if you look at the sort of the I guess the right-hand side or the bottom and right-hand side, you can sort of see where we've talked about. For example, Farmers Business Network is really in the ag marketplace space. They've generated $629 million of investment. They're fairly well along. Farmers Edge is really at the precision agriculture side. They're also doing quite well in terms of the investment stake in that business. Insect investors believe this is an early stage company, but has lots and lots of potential. And you can see that those animal technologies areas. If you think about the right-hand side, it really has to look at all those sensors and that imagery. I just circle a company there, or look at a company under the sensors area called Semios. It's a Vancouver-based company, but basically they provide precision agriculture down to the tree for tree fruit farmers or nuts or vines. And so every particular vine or every particular tree has its own sensing ecosystem, so that you basically now work at the tree level as opposed to the field level or the orchard level or anything like that. And what their goal is to really optimize the health of that plant while minimizing the inputs that you place on them. On the left-hand side, you see other areas that are spending a lot of time. Indoor agriculture is generating lots of money. Arrow Farms, for example, down in the bottom left, really looks at making leafy products close to the city. And so they have large-scale farms that are producing lettuces and the like, very close to large cities. Plant sciences is a big area I haven't really talked about because it really, this is really thinking about how do I take the strengths of particular plants and choose the way in which I breed them or put them together. Whether or not that, it's still putting traits in seeds is actually a very big business. And the final area that I hadn't also talked very much about, but is also important, is crop protection and input management, because there's a whole range of things in terms of how do I manage my inputs that it really sort of lowers that area. So if you think of across ag tech, these are sort of the big areas that they're looking into. On crop tech, for example, here's a company, Taramara, out of Vancouver, that is doing some interesting things. They've got a technology that makes natural plant characteristics 10 times more effective. So if there is a characteristic of an organic input that repels a particular pest, they have a technology that activates that technology to a much greater degree. So what they're trying to use is natural methods to actually protect crops rather than chemical methods. And again, this is very much along the lines of those three big goals: traceability, sustainability, and carbon neutrality. And those are the ones that are driving this ag tech space. Now, if I step away from that a little bit on the next slide and think about, well, how is this world unfolding? And, Canada itself is falling behind in this area. And I believe that this has implications for Indigenous groups as well, because it really means that Indigenous groups that are located, their nations are located in the area we call Canada, are going to really need to have some of these technologies close by. Canada is the 8th largest exporter of ag products globally, with an eye to move this to the top 5. And this is one of the things that's been pushed all the time. You've had a talk in this session already, probably by the proteins cluster that's located in Regina, and are really looking at plant-based proteins. And I think those areas are really the forefront of where Canada can grow into that top 5 area. But if you think about all the tech that I've talking about, it really is a disconnect a bit. Canada produces about 1.6% of the total value of agriculture production globally. You'd think it'd be higher, but the reality is that China and India and the United States and Indonesia, all these areas that have very, very large populations, also have a large food value. But at the same time, we only attract about 0.4% of the ag tech investment. And that's the best we can track. We're about 1/4 of where we should be in terms of ag tech investment. And why is this important? Why do I think this is important? Is that in most areas, if you think outside of agriculture, technology winners dominate globally. If you think of the Apples, the Googles, the Amazons and the like, the same thing will happen within ag technology. There's only going to be a smaller number of winners, even though we saw all of those different areas. And having some close to home is actually important. More of the value that we create in Canada through our phone will be leaving if we're just sort of shipping off the cost of this technology to somewhere else. And it really provides less opportunity for Indigenous peoples to participate other than being buyers. And I think we want to be more than that in the ag tech space as well. So what's going on here? What's causing this issue? Well, one area that people always look towards is the Netherlands. So the Netherlands is a very small country. It's about 1/16 the size of Texas, and it is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. When you listen to the radio, you might in Canada hear that there's a traffic jam on a major highway close to a big city. In Holland, they talk about traffic jams across the country because there is population everywhere. It also, at the same time, is the world's second largest exporter of food by value, which is amazing given that it has no space, yet this is what it does. They have been a really early ag tech adopter and innovator, and they really have had this focus on sustainable agriculture. And so they've been working at this for a long time. They have their limitations, and they are really pushing them. So water usage, for example, in many crops using Dutch methods is about 90% lower. So if you look at the little graphic of the cylinders on the bottom left-hand part of this screen on the Netherlands, you can see that, to grow a pound of tomatoes, the Netherlands uses 1.1 gallons, where the global average is about 25.6 gallons. In the US, it's even 15 gallons. And so you can see that by, saving these resources, they're able to sort of, make things with less. In the large greenhouse areas, and they have large greenhouses, some up to 170 hectares, or about 400 acres large in single greenhouses. Chemical pesticides are almost eliminated. And so if you think of how do we get towards more organic type product, then what you're seeing is a way to control the environment so the pesticides can't get in. Between 2003 and 2014, they've had a 28% increase in vegetable yields, 6% reduction in energy, and a 29% reduction in fertilizer. And so this is the way we need to be going in agriculture, doing more with less. Part of the reason for doing this is they've had outstanding universities within the production system for years. And if you look at the bottom right hand, here is yields that they're getting on different products. The first two is if you think about green peppers or chilies as well as cucumbers, they're both number one in the world. And you can see that the smaller lines beside it are the yields of the next 24 after them, which is like nowhere near as effective. Even in other areas where they're in the top 5 in terms of onions, potatoes, and carrots, pears, you can see that their yields are very high, but nowhere near in some of the ones that they've really concentrated on. Go to the next slide and ask the question, why can't Canada be like that? Why can't Canada be like the Netherlands in their areas? And that should be something we should aspire to. But there are some challenges that I think we need to be willing to come to grips with. Number one, Canada is large and sparsely populated. Though it seems counterintuitive that the Netherlands is small and densely populated, what you realize is that being large is not necessarily better. Yes, we have the land mass, but the fact we don't necessarily have the right people where they need to be. In cities, engineers and data scientists and all these people that provide the data and the research is where they are located. We need them to be out on the farm, and getting between the two means that they have other choices to move into other industries rather than ag tech. Sadly, broadband connectivity is not where it needs to be. Again, if you think about the connectivity of a country like the Netherlands, it's everywhere is population, everywhere is connectivity. Finally, our land is more suited to lower value commodities. Now, this might evolve over time, but when we think about wheat or canola or corn or barley or these kinds of crops, they tend to be lower value. We are trying to move that up, but that's the nature of the land that we have. And so getting to the levels of ag tech influence like they have in the Netherlands is going to be hard for that reason. A second reason that we're going to have challenges is our education. I'm from a university. Don't get me wrong. I believe we have excellent universities and excellent ag universities in Canada. But we just have separate universities. And what I mean by that is we have separate both within and between. Universities don't cooperate the way they could with each other and with industry in the same way. We're trying to get there further, but it's not to the same extent that we see in other countries. They're also separate within. And what I mean by that is that different departments within different universities don't really talk very much. If you think about the top ag universities in Canada, and we could say Saskatchewan, we could say Guelph, and probably McGill would be 3 great ag universities. And you look at where they're business schools. The business schools do not talk almost to a degree to what's going on in the ag school. And they really have totally different focuses. And if we're going to be successful in ag tech, you really need to merge those together. And we're seeing some of that happen at sort of the community college level, Olds College, for example, and some of the other areas, but we're not seeing it to the degree we need to. And secondly, we have an increasingly academic versus applied focus at our universities. And I think, though I understand fully why academics is important to the academics that are there, we really do need to have an applied focus. Because what's going to happen here is that it's the applying of this ag tech that's going to get us to better food production than really the academics of this. And if I'm at an ag university, I might want to study the plant and the soil and all of these kinds of things that really lead to great productivity from an academic perspective. But I really need to mix in that messiness of data. And that's going to be, is harder to do in the environment and the reward systems we have. And the third one is access to capital. And hopefully this is changing. The Mars Discovery District in Toronto is the largest incubator or accelerator in the world for technology. And it's located in Toronto. They have programs on med tech, IT, and artificial intelligence. They wanted to have one on ag tech, but they actually couldn't get the investments in place, and partly because Canada is large and sparsely populated, partly because the opportunities they have too many opportunities in med tech, IT tech, and AI. Toronto is becoming the technology hub for many of these things in the world. And finally, ag tech has a longer horizon. We have growing seasons. We have to see how things pass through growing seasons, so the cycles can't be as fast as they are in other technologies, and so there's less interest. And always historically, the argument is that Canada has been unable to attract sufficient capital. Now, this is changing, as you've seen over the last few months or several months, several very large investments in Canadian technology, and hopefully that'll change. But if you see those differences contrasted to where the Netherlands is sitting, you can see why there are differences. Where I think we need to improve is that we need to make sure that there is the resources available to those that want to participate in the location where they are. And I do think there are some promising signs on the horizon. So for education, development, and networks, there's a number of areas. There's bioenterprise, which really is trying to pull together all of those innovators in the ag space. There's the Canadian Technology Accelerator Ag Tech program that is trying to, pull together all of those ag tech companies and actually exposing them to both internal and external funders. Zone Ag Tech in Quebec is another areas. And then the next two I think are really significant and I think really should be where a lot of our emphasis is placed, and that's Proteins Industries Canada, which is the supercluster based out of Regina. Their mandate is to create an ecosystem that supports the building of a Canadian plant protein industry, and I think they're well on the way, and I think they have great potential. At the same time, Canada's Ocean Supercluster in Halifax has got the same objective for marine. Now, marine food is only part of that mandate, but I do think that there is some opportunities there. And finally, I think FCC is a great source to sort of think through how they connect different peoples in agriculture. The Farm Credit Corporation touches all parts of agriculture and are very well connected and are trying to pull together programs that help do that. Financing has been a bit behind the game, but there is some growing things. There's a company called AgCap Canada that has really taken some leaders in the agricultural industry and said, how do we actually grow great ideas in Canada, and are trying to invest in that. The bioenterprise space has a Capital Ventures. TELUS is getting into the agriculture business, and the other groups like the AVAC group are also trying to finance. So there is places and areas that we can go to get more expertise, but we are far behind some of the larger venture areas that you see in other parts of the world. So this is where we sort of turn as to how can you participate in the ag tech revolution? And I do believe it will be a revolution, no matter And when you think of those big three goals of traceability, sustainability, and low carbon, all of those things are going to involve technology. What exactly that technology will be and how do you use it really becomes the choice that different people have. And as you think back and think through how do I want to participate, you really need to first think through how do you want to participate in agriculture. And it seems like an odd way to start, but it really is starting with what's the strategy. Do we want to be involved in commodity production? So growing, cereals, oil seeds, plant proteins, you name it. And if that's the case, then we need to focus on product improving technologies. So that's really where we would like to look at. Do we want to focus on organic? Because we know that organic is going to be a growing area, and we are on the cusp, I think, of actually having mass organic because the technology might allow us to do that. So that's going to be focused on gaining access to markets, on traceability because you have to prove organic provenance, and on labor-saving techniques because one of the reasons why we have moved towards different types of pesticide use or fertilizer use or different things like that is because they have been labor-saving technology. So if you're going to invest in organics, you need to really think about labor savings. Do we want to participate in low-impact agriculture? Which is actually a very interesting idea because one of the areas that a number of the companies are involved in is measuring the carbon capture capability of agriculture and restorative agriculture and how that is actually going to pull carbon out of the air. And these will become carbon credits. And can we actually measure what that carbon capture is and then sell those credits? So in a sense, we are farming or trying to sell what we are farming is carbon credits. And that's an interesting idea, very low value right now, but it could be very much in our future. And if we think about the ways in which we can employ indigenous approaches or measurement capabilities, it might be an interesting way to look at on how you might want to participate. Another area is to think about how do we create our own marketplace, because we might be able to develop very unique products and applications that might be, not, universally demanded, but demanded by specific markets. So how do we create a marketplace that actually values what we have to produce? So one of the things that digital technologies allow us to do is to take whatever we're producing and find a market for it in a very efficient way. Or do we want to participate in ingredients that might focus on health or well-being or sustainable production and those kinds of areas? So I think before we think about how do we participate in ag tech, we need to think about how do we want to participate in agriculture. And then I think you really, have to determine what role do we want to play. Because you can think about ag tech as, holy cow, look at all these companies making stuff. But the reality is that at the end of the day, someone's going to have to buy this technology, and they have to buy it for a reason that makes sense. So where do you want to participate in this whole process? Do you want to be a user? And it's important that, and that's where most people are going to end up, is they buy technology to make themselves more efficient or keep up. But what they're really going to have to do is become experts in determining, does the technology add value? Is it profitable? Does it really meet the goal that I really want to create? And if that's the role you want to play, then it behooves you to really bone yourself up on how technology can help the operation that we want to create. Secondly, do we want to be a tech creator? Do we want to build something new that sells to others? This is a long and potentially expensive process, but with a number of supports in place, it could be something that would be an interesting to those that have, really good ideas. Or third, do I want to be a complementer? Do I want to be the organization that helps tech creators? One of the challenges that a lot of creators have is that who's going to try out my stuff? Who's going to be that pilot user? And if you're a site demonstrator for early access to the technology, you might be able to get it at a better cost or see how valuable it might be. You might have specific insight, or you might have resources to influence the design of what the outcome is, so that the technology that gets created is best suited for the types of things you want to do. Or you might be able to assist in the distribution of the adoption. So, not only do I have to think about what kind of agriculture do I want to participate in, as how do I want to participate in the ag tech space? Finally, I think you need to really be sure to incorporate the future. Climate change will affect where crops are grown, and that has particular impact on Canada. And it has particular impact on Indigenous nations as well. So I've got two panels here, two panels of two each. If you look at the top panel on this slide, you can see that where between 1960 and 1990, where corn is grown and where they predict corn will be grown according to weather climate models in the future. And you can see that much of the area is going to be much higher, much more northerly than we had seen before into Quebec and Ontario and Manitoba space. Similarly, 1960 to 1990 in wheat in North America, and you move over to the right-hand side and you can see the wheat band spreading across Canada, but a much more northerly environment. Now, these are just two crops where the climate models have looked at, but you can take any crop. And all of this indicates that there is going to be dramatic increase in our arable land in Canada, much of it in more northerly regions, that we have to determine how we want to sort of use in agriculture, or whether we want to use in agriculture. And again, if you think about how I want to participate, you better think about what's the future going to be like. Already, there are views, for example, that the best Pinot Noir varieties are now grown in Canada, both in Niagara and the Okanagan Valley, because as the climate for that very weather-sensitive grape changes, more northerly climates become vegetable. And you can just think about other crops in this way as well. So how do you get started? And I think this is really where you have to sort of think through both the strategy and where you want to move next. So for developing a strategy, there are conferences like this one, which I think are great to sort of give a background on what's the innovations that are available to Indigenous agriculture. There was a forum, I'm not quite exactly sure of the date, I believe it was 2019, a forum on Indigenous agriculture in Saskatchewan. They've got some great write-ups of what came out of this, and they've also had some next steps that they're following through on. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has developed an Indigenous Agriculture and Food Systems Initiative. And so you can look towards that in terms of how that could fit into where those look into. The Assembly of First Nations is putting out a First Nations agricultural strategy, and you can look towards farm commodity groups. But I do think that's got to be the starting point. When you're thinking about ag tech, you really want to think about finding potential fund partners or funding. And I think bioenterprise, FCC, and the super clusters are great locations. But I also think you're going to find a welcome home also at many universities and colleges, because I think we all recognize that Indigenous agriculture is going to be an important part of our future, and how we can blend these things together is really, really important. I kind of want to end on the last slide by looking at some real truths. Agriculture is core to all our futures. Food is really what sustains us, and we need greater Indigenous participation, especially in our regions as well. But we need to recognize that ag tech is going to be part of an effective strategy. There is too much to be gained from really understanding how weather systems, soil systems, pesticide systems all work together to sort of create ideal agriculture. And what role that plays depends on a whole series of factors, but it will be a factor, and it's growing and growing fast. I think I'll end there. Again, I want to thank you for having the opportunity to speak to the Indigenous Agricultural Conference. I'll make these slides available to those that can watch it some other time, and it's been a great opportunity. So thank you very much.